One question I have sometimes asked a class of interns is, who's not here? By which I mean, who in your second grade class is not at the university, and where do they drop out along the way? And so we think about it for a little while.
Yeah.
And what it begins to show is that the idea that what worked for me will work for my students just doesn't hold water. That there's a whole bunch of people who dropped out along the way that aren't like me, and wouldn't be served by moves that would suit me. It's a fact of life.
Yeah. And I
Get
think
used to it.
that's a very powerful component of the interpretation section. You have to start with that idea that seeing things from different multiple perspectives, being circumspect about a situation, trying to come to some multiple ideas for what could be going on, explaining what's going on, requires you to have more than just your view about what is proper and good and right in this particular situation.
And I would say also then the generous thing is that the interpretation, while not indicting students, should not then be one in which you then fall on your own sword and indict yourself.
Absolutely.
That it be an opening experience to gain more knowledge, wisdom about how you interact with students and how you might interact, make moves that would get more satisfying results for a wider range of students.
Interpretation is not a process of allocating blame.
Yes.
It's a process of trying to figure out what's happening better than you now understand it, so that you can do something about it. Falling on your own sword doesn't do anything for your kids. It just makes you tireder. So if anything, that does less. Some of the most admirable hypotheses I've seen in interpretations, assuming that the description has the data for it, take the form, the intern, right? The intern had this idea about something, and pursued it, but it was based on a wrong assumption. And that's taking responsibility, right? The intern got into this thing with this student about respect, and contributed to perpetuating. Well, that's not an allocation of blame. That's figuring out what's going on here.
Right.
That's how you get yourself out of situations like that.
Right.
You say, the intern's into a thing with this student,
Right.
and she's got to sort of find a way to de-escalate and get out of it.
Move it back.
So
That's hard. It's hard to do that.
So the other thing regarding interpretation that I was curious about is making use of resources to be able to expand your perspective. So making use of literature, making use of colleagues, making use of instructors, making use of the wide range of resources, professional resources that you have, the professional wisdom, to be able to say, you know what, I would not have thought of this interpretation, but having read or having spoken to or having, this outside other experience, I've expanded my repertoire of explanations for what's going on.
Right.
As I understand, in studies of novices and experts in various fields, one of the things that distinguishes experts from novices is this rich body of schema that enable them to interpret what's going on, to see pattern. It's like repertoire. Having more ways to see a situation gives you more angles on that situation. And it also can be help you to help you out of the trap of always thinking what you always thought.
And one of the traps for a novice maybe in watching the master teacher is that it may look as if the master teacher makes these moves sort of intuitively, and so as a novice I can do the same, whereas the master teacher has done the work, has developed this repertoire, and that repertoire is well learned, so that the moves are based on lots of study and work, but it's not seen. And sometimes I think masters are not able to even analyze, or, you know, they make the moves and aren't able to articulate exactly how or why or where it has become so much a part of all these angles that they have. Whereas a novice has still the work to do.
They're learnable. Learning them takes time and effort. This business of drawing on the literature is an important one, I think. I don't know how many people have experienced that there is something for life in books, right? And so maybe it's a little hard to believe at first. But I think the secondary classroom management is a good enough example. You can think of that as some expert propounding from the Mount. But if you actually read it, what you find is that what Carol has done is to summarize a bunch of studies, most of which were done in classrooms, about how teachers, effective managers, operate. And so if she offers this list of 12 things to motivate kids to learn, what she's talking about is a whole series of studies in which somebody went into classrooms and watched classrooms operate and started characterizing these standard dozen
So they
moves.
unpacked the expert work.
Right. And put it in a nice tidy form for us to put there. So it's an easy way, it seems to me, to stir your mind up. Right? When you're vexed about a situation, one of the things I do is riffle the extended table of contents. Just what might be going on here? And often I see things
what
that
does Carol
probably
say?
connect, right? And so I can look into it.
And and you could also go to the bibliography or the reference section and see if you wanted to find out more.
Yep.
I mean, it's a pretty ready reference for
It's
going
more.
deeper if you want and
But
need.
partly I see this as a moral matter. We got to have good enough reasons for what we're doing to other people's children. And trying to understand everything all by ourselves just isn't morally responsible when there's so much help so ready at hand. It isn't a moral position. We get better with the help of our friends, right? We make ourselves moral by considering other options when we try to interpret a situation. It's what we owe to our students to do.
Right. And the word I like is ethical. You know,
Yeah.
it's ethical decision making regarding, these students who are in our care.
Yeah. Particularly for cases, because if you understood it all, right, you wouldn't have chosen it for a case. I mean, that's the premise. Right? This is expensive.
If you're
it's
playing
expensive
for
form of
keeps.
thing. That's right.
And that is the big if that goes kind of back to
Yep.
the purpose, but
If you're playing for keeps,
Yeah.
you would recognize that your habitual ways of thinking aren't getting the job done. So you're looking for another way to think about it, and that's what you do in the
right.
interpretation.
And you don't have to take blame or give blame. You're putting yourself in the role of learner who's digging to understand something better, therefore make more ethical moves.
Yeah.
Okay.